It happened not long after I started university. I began working the night shift at a convenience store near the train station in my hometown. The only reason I chose the job was because of the high hourly pay. I thought it would be easy. After all, there wouldn't be many customers late at night. All I had to do was restock shelves, tidy up a bit, and make it through until morning. The night shift was a solo rotation, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. In the beginning, I actually enjoyed the sense of working at my own pace. But for some reason, once the clock passed 2 a.m., everything outside seemed to sink into complete darkness. Inside the store, the harsh white fluorescent lights remained on, yet an eerie sense of disconnection from the rest of the world began to settle in. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator compressor and the buzzing of the lights overhead. Occasionally, the wind would creak the sign outside. The first time I felt genuine fear was during a night of heavy rain. A downpour had turned the road in front of the store into a wide puddle. I assumed no one would come in such weather. But then, without warning, the automatic doors slid open with a mechanical sound. When I looked up, I saw a woman stepping into the store. She had no umbrella and was soaked from head to toe. Her hair clung wetly to her face, and water dripped steadily from her clothes, forming a puddle beneath her feet. Her complexion was ghostly pale, and her eyes were vacant, void of life or expression. Out of habit, I greeted her, but she made no reply. Silently, she walked toward the magazine section. The only sound was the drip of water from her clothes. She picked up a magazine and began flipping through it slowly, without a word. Occasionally, a faint creaking sound came from her direction. Something subtle, like a bone shifting, and it only made the silence feel more oppressive. About 10 minutes passed. Without purchasing anything, she turned and quietly walked toward the exit. The doors slid open again, and she vanished into the storm. Panicked, I rushed to the entrance, but there was no one outside. It didn't make sense. Even with the rain and poor visibility, there was no way she could have disappeared so quickly. And then I noticed something that chilled me even more. The spot where she had stood was completely dry. A cold shiver ran through me, and I forgot how to breathe. After that, strange customers began appearing during my shifts. One hot summer night, a man entered the store wearing a heavy coat and a thick scarf. He approached the counter with a sandwich in hand, but it was not a product we sold. The packaging was yellowed and moldy, clearly aged. He asked to pay. His voice was hoarse and gravelly, as if full of sand. I tried to explain that the item wasn't from our store, but he slowly raised his head. Most of his face was hidden behind the scarf, revealing only his eyes, bloodshot and unfocused, and from the gaps in the fabric came a chilling, unnatural cold. He calmly insisted that it didn't matter, and reached into his coat to hand me a 1,000 yen note. I swallowed my discomfort and scanned the item. A shrill error tone immediately sounded. Unsurprisingly, the barcode couldn't be read. It wasn't a valid product. The expiration date printed on the label was from 2 years ago. I began to apologize, but when I looked up, he was already gone. The doors had made no sound. It was as though he had never been there at all. Too frightened to throw the sandwich away, I simply tossed it into the staff room's locker and shut the door. The next day, I told the store manager what had happened. He listened with a half smile and brushed it off. But when I returned to the locker later, The sandwich was gone. The most terrifying incident occurred a few days later. It was another quiet night. After 2 a.m., the store sank once more into silence. I sat behind the counter, bored and scrolling on my phone. Suddenly, from the direction of the magazine aisle, I heard a sound. A rhythmic, distinct tapping. Click, click. At first, I thought it might be a rat, but the sound was too loud, too precise. I stepped out from behind the counter and approached carefully. Next to the magazine rack was the candy and instant noodle section. The sound seemed to be coming from between the shelves. I crept closer, step by step, holding my breath. And then I saw it. A hand. A human hand was reaching out through the gap in the shelves. A few pale fingers tapped lightly against the floor. Click, click, click. My blood froze in my veins. The hand slowly slid further out. The fingers were pale, the joints bent at unnatural angles, the nails darkened. It crawled along the floor as if searching for something, like a living thing. Worse still, there was nothing beyond the wrist. No arm, no body, just the hand moving of its own will. Click, click. The sound grew louder as it came closer. I stood paralyzed with fear, unable to move. The hand reached my feet. It was right in front of me, and then it vanished, like smoke, gone in an instant. I collapsed to the floor, trembling uncontrollably, barely able to breathe. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, I dragged myself back to the counter and sat frozen until sunrise. The next day, I quit. That hand, that woman in the rain, the man with the decaying sandwich. Every time I pass that convenience store now, the memories flood back. From the outside, a brightly lit store in the dead of night looks like a glowing cage, one that might be waiting for something. Sometimes, without thinking, my eyes drift toward the shadowy corners of the shop, and in my mind, I imagine that hand, slowly, silently reaching out once again from between the shelves. As for what truly happened in that convenience store, to this day, I still have no idea. My name is Sauri. I'm just an ordinary office worker living in the city, working at an advertising company. The job is stressful. I often work late into the night and usually catch the last train home. There's never any time to cook, so my meals mostly come from convenience stores or food delivery apps that I've been relying on more and more. That night was no different. I came back to my apartment, exhausted. I opened the fridge. It was completely empty. All I wanted was something warm to eat, so I grabbed my phone and opened my Go To Delivery app. As I scrolled through the menu, trying to decide what to order, an unfamiliar name popped up under Recommended for You. The Herb Diner. It was a strange name. The listing simply said Homestyle Set Meal and offered just one fixed menu per day. The price was oddly cheap. There were no photos of the food, no reviews, no ratings, nothing about it looked trustworthy. Normally, I wouldn't have given a place like that a second thought. But that night, I was too tired, too hungry, too foggy-headed. Figured, why not give it a try? So I placed the order. While waiting, I opened the app's map to see where the delivery person was. What I saw was even stranger. The delivery icon moved in impossible ways, riding over the river, cutting through dense buildings, disappearing and reappearing at random. It defied logic. It gave me chills, but I was too worn out to care. Eventually, The app notified me, delivery complete, but the doorbell didn't ring. No one knocked. Puzzled, I opened the door. Sitting on the ground was an old wooden lunchbox. Who even uses wooden bento boxes these days? This one was clearly aged, worn smooth by years of use. There was no delivery person in sight. I opened the box cautiously. Steam rose from inside: white rice, miso soup, grilled fish, stewed vegetables, pickles. Simple, but beautifully arranged, with a gentle aroma of broth that reminded me of childhood. I brought it inside and ate. To my surprise, it was delicious. Not fancy, not flashy, but comforting. Bite after bite, it warmed me deeply, just like the meals my grandmother used to make. I finished it down to the last grain. Then, a wave of overwhelming sleepiness washed over me. I collapsed onto the sofa and dozed off. In my dream, I was sitting at a dimly lit Japanese dining table. Around me were people I didn't recognize. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, but somehow I felt like part of the family, like I belonged there. The next morning, I tried to find the Herb Diner again on the app. It was gone. I wondered if I'd made some mistake. But a few nights later, after another late shift, I came home, and there it was again. That same wooden box waiting at my door. I hadn't placed an order. Inside was a different set of dishes, but warm and delicious as before. Even stranger, every time by morning the box would vanish without a trace. No delivery record, nothing in the app's history. First I felt uneasy, but over time I started to depend on it. That warm, familiar taste. It soothed my exhausted body and mind. One night, I waited by the door, peering through the peephole, hoping to catch a glimpse. And I did. A shadowy figure approached silently, placed the box, and left. The lighting was dim, but I saw enough. The figure wasn't solid. It was semi-transparent, with gliding, ghost-like steps. They weren't dressed like a modern courier, but in old-fashioned Japanese clothing. A chill ran down my spine. That wasn't a living person. Panicked, I contacted customer support for the delivery app. I explained the strange deliveries and asked if they had a restaurant called the Herb Diner on record. They told me, "We're sorry, but there is no such restaurant on our platform, and we have no order history for your account." I pushed back, but the food came. I saw the delivery icon moving on the map. They replied in a robotic tone, "It may be a system glitch. Please try reinstalling the app." All pre-written responses. I was left with no answers. What was that food? Who or what was delivering it? That night, when I found another box at my door, I didn't even feel surprised, just resigned. I opened it, but this time there was no food inside. Instead, I found an old black and white photograph and a small rusty key. The photo showed a family from what looked like the Meiji era. A stern father, a gentle mother, and several children posed in harmony. But what shocked me was the teenage girl standing beside the mother. Her face was identical to mine, and in the background, just barely visible, was a shadowy male figure in traditional dress, the same one I'd seen through the peephole. On the back of the photo were words scribbled in ink. "Old Mizunoya House, waiting for you." Mizunoya was the name of the area I lived in, but I'd never heard of an old Mizunoya house. That night I couldn't sleep. A strange sense of familiarity stirred in me, as though something long buried was calling. The next day I had off work. I followed the directions on the photo, wandering into a cluster of old homes near my neighborhood. And there it was, a weathered Japanese estate, quietly standing apart from time itself. The gate was shut. I took the key from the box, slid it into the lock, and heard a soft click. I stepped inside. The creaking door opened to a small garden. overgrown with moss and silence. I crossed the yard and entered the house. It was quiet. The air smelled of age and dust. I passed several empty rooms before stopping in front of a tatami room at the back. From inside came a faint aroma, familiar, warm, like the meals from the Herb Diner. I slid the door open. Inside, a large dining table was laid out with steaming dishes. The very same dishes I'd received all those nights. Seated around the table were the family from the photo, smiling gently, their faces still a little blurred, softly glowing. One girl stood up and waved to me. She looked exactly like me. Her voice was warm and familiar, like something I'd carried inside me for years. "Welcome home, Miss Saori. We've been waiting for you. Your seat is right here." In that moment, I felt no fear, only the sensation of a traveler returning. I walked forward and took my place at the table. The aroma, the smiles, the deep sense of belonging wrapped around me like a soft blanket. From that moment on, I stopped wondering whether I'd ever return to the world I once knew. Mr. Yamada was as ordinary a middle-aged office worker as one could imagine. He left home at the same time every day, rode the same train, sat in the same seat at his office. When the clock struck the hour, he headed straight back home. He had no particular hobbies. On weekends, he either dazed off at home or strolled aimlessly around the neighborhood. And it was in the midst of this completely uneventful routine that something curious began to happen. Started one bright afternoon during lunch break. He sat, as he always did, on a park bench near the office, sipping canned coffee. His eyes drifted absent-mindedly to the ground, and that's when he noticed his shadow. It was dark and well-defined, clinging closely to his body's silhouette, but something about it seemed slightly off. Mr. Yamada tilted his head. He felt as if his movements and the shadows were just a little out of sync. He slowly raised his right hand. The shadow raised its own, but with a noticeable hesitation, just a beat behind. He waved his hand quickly a few times. The shadow followed, flailing to catch up, clumsy, as if struggling to mimic him. Perhaps he was just too tired, he thought as he finished the last sip of his coffee. It had to be a trick of the mind. Too much overtime lately. But after that day, he began watching his shadow more closely, and he realized sometimes it really did move on its own. On the way to work, even when he walked straight ahead, his shadow would sway from side to side. When he passed a shop window, he kept walking, but the shadow seemed to pause, peering in as though curious. Once, while sitting at his desk using the computer, he glanced down and saw the shadow bouncing its leg under the table, something he had never done. It seemed the shadow had a will of its own, not the behavior of an adult, but more like a mischievous, curious child. Pretended to blow dandelions, mimicked chasing pigeons in the park. Mr. Yamada began to quietly scold it in his head, asking it to behave. Strangely, no one else ever noticed anything odd. To others, his shadow appeared completely normal, just an ordinary, silent reflection of his body. Over time, he began to think of it as his own little secret. Sometimes it even helped. Once, when he dropped one of his earbuds, the shadow gestured frantically in its direction, guiding him toward it. But it could also be a nuisance. During dull meetings, it would cast animal shapes on the wall, playing with hand shadows like a child. And once, when being scolded by his boss, Mr. Yamada tried to keep a straight face while his shadow folded its arms and turned away, its posture practically dripping with irritation. He nearly burst out laughing. He also began to notice that the shadow's shape sometimes changed. It no longer always matched his form. Sometimes it stretched taller and thinner, other times it appeared shorter, rounder, like someone else entirely. In those moments, it felt as though another person had briefly taken up residence within his shadow. At first, the thought sent shivers down his spine, but gradually he got used to it. After all, it wasn't doing any real harm. In fact, he started to enjoy it. This odd companion brought a dash of intrigue to his otherwise monotone life. It felt like a strange kind of partnership, like having a playful, invisible friend stitched to his feet. Deep down, he started to think that maybe, just maybe, it was a part of him after all. From time to time, he would glance down and murmur a tired little smile toward the floor. That day was no different. He sat on the park bench again, drinking his usual coffee. At his feet, the shadow was twitching toward the woman sitting on the next bench, curious and unbothered by his stillness. He shrugged, grumbled internally for it to behave, but then let it be. Mr. Yamada's shadow continued to play, full of energy, doing whatever it pleased. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know why it was happening. But he thought, perhaps this wasn't such a bad thing. It was a small, unspoken secret, something strange, something harmless, that had quietly entered the life of an ordinary man. It happened beside a kindergarten bus. Late one night, I received a call from a friend. He told me he was out for a drive in the nearby mountains and asked if I wanted to join him. I checked the time. It was already 1 a.m. getting to the mountain rest area where he said would have taken me at least 30 minutes. So I declined. He let out a playful complaint, half laughing as he continued talking. Though he spoke lightly, I could sense he was feeling a bit lonely, sitting there alone at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. That's probably why he called, to have someone to talk to. So we kept chatting. After a while, he suddenly mentioned something odd. He said he had assumed he was alone, but there was also a kindergarten bus parked nearby. He joked that it must be the perfect time for a school field trip. I didn't think much of it at first. I casually responded, going along with his banter, saying something about how I'd been forced to go on mountain hikes in high school too. The conversation carried on without pause. But then, something felt off. I glanced down at the clock. It was 1:20 a.m. He had already called me after 1 o'clock. That meant the bus had arrived at this mountain rest stop. At this very hour? That didn't make any sense. I asked him if there was anyone inside the bus. He responded that there were indeed people on board. Some teachers in printed uniforms and a few kindergarten-age children. Apparently, they had just gotten off the bus to use the restroom. My stomach sank. A kindergarten bus? In the mountains? At 1:20 in the morning? It had to be a mistake or something worse. I didn't want to scare him, but I urged him to leave immediately. I suggested he come down the mountain and head to my place. He resisted at first, saying he had only just started his night drive and wanted to do one more lap before heading back. I pushed harder, asking him if he realized what time it was. He seemed to finally check, acknowledging that it was past 1 a.m. Then I asked him plainly, would a kindergarten bus, carrying children and teachers, ever stop at a remote rest area in the mountains at this time of night? There was a pause. Something in his voice changed. He said he understood. He would leave right away. Then I asked one more question. Where were the children now? He didn't answer that one. Instead, he told me not to think about it and said he was starting the engine. I heard the roar of his motorcycle in the background. He said he was heading to my place right away. I told him not to stop, not to look back. He agreed. The call ended there. Took about an hour before he reached my house. When he arrived, his face was pale. I didn't press him. I waited until he calmed down. After about 30 minutes of silence, he finally began to speak in a low voice. He told me that, after our last exchange, he had started up the motorcycle right away. And that's when he saw them. Those people from the bus, they were right beside him. He had been so focused on our conversation that he hadn't noticed before. But he suspected they had been near him the whole time. He said that as he climbed onto the bike and looked up, he finally saw them clearly. And on their faces, there was a kind of expression that said, "So, you finally noticed." They were smiling, but not with their eyes. Only the corners of their mouths moved. Their eyes, he said, were completely missing. When he told me this, his fear was unmistakable. It wasn't an exaggeration or a joke. Felt real. And even though I had just been on the phone with him minutes earlier, even though everything sounded too strange to be true, somehow I believed him. He later told me he threw his phone away that very night. After sunrise, we both returned to the rest area together, searching for the phone. But there were no signs that anything had happened. No evidence of a bus, no trace of children or teachers. Nothing. That mountain, as far as anyone knew, had no stories, no rumors of anything supernatural. Still, sometimes in this world, things happen that can't be explained.